been about 2 weeks since we put the first 3 layers on here. I guess one of the common misconceptions is that if you sand it back and wipe it with acetone, then you can reactivate the resin so that you get a good chemical bond again. The problem with that is by using acetone, you in fact weaken the substrate you've already laid down. So we this whole hole has had a complete sand, pretty ordinary job. I did it to around about 80 grit, and with a machine sander, and we've gotten rid of any little imperfections, and our AMSA surveyors basically identified a few small sort of voids that we've now cleared up. So you can see on the mould here, you can see some dark patches along the side here, small areas where we've identified some small voids. We've fixed those. But the next thing after sanding that is we give it a wipe down with a styrene monomer, and by doing that you're actually using the same carrier that is in the resin that immediately reactivates the resin after a good sand, and so you're getting a good physical sort of a biting motion on the next layer of sand, and then the chemical reaction, which is what we're after. So this has had a full sand now and ready to go again. So here we go. So I find just giving it a dry roll with a roller, you can get out most of your voids, and then you get your gun, spray it on again, and then weather out. It's a 1200 gram quad, so it's very thick and it makes a lot of resin. Yeah, so one of the best bits of advice I can give you is when you're putting on quad or rovings or double bias, triax or anything like that, when you put it on, spray your resin on, or roll your resin on, then place your cloth and then get a dry brush, and that dry brush will just about remove most of your bubbles for you before you do your final wet out. The ability to be able to sort of put it on means you get out of all your little wrinkles, and all your little bubbles are gone before you actually start to consolidate with your rollers. So laminating tip 101. So this is the laminate I've just done, so actually still a little bit wet, but yeah, this is a 1200 gram per square metre. So this is a 4-layered quadrat that's pretty much got to form the basis of the strength of the hull. We've got another layer of 300 CSM to go on him tomorrow, and then we can put our 20mm foam on, so we've already pre-cut that. You'll recall a couple of episodes ago I had my trusty whiteboard out here with my my laminating schedules, my plans here with my foam core placement and such like. I guess at the end of that video I got a number of comments from guys in the yacht building trade and obviously canoe builders, kayak builders, anyone that's dealt with any type of fiberglass in fact. And a lot of you guys out there are very knowledgeable in these sorts of builds. But one thing I guess what's happened is that I feel like I've assumed that in some respects that most of you know exactly what I'm talking about. What is very interesting is the number of different substrates that can be used to laminate together and form a monocoque construction. Now, monocoque meaning that it is essentially one single structure that carries most, or if not all, of the load that a craft like a yacht or a catamaran or a canoe or a kayak can sustain out in the ocean over the course of its life. That notwithstanding the fact that it may need bulkheads and internal structure to make it sound and a strong structure, monocoque provides the sort of the impact and the stress load for the rest of the craft. So by laminating a number of these different substrates together, we're able to form a structure that can in fact tolerate those loads over a long period of time or for its lifetime. One other thing I did is I assumed that most people knew what I was talking about with regard to chop strand matting and double bias and quadraxial and peel ply, and it's interesting because I guess we all go into our local hardware stores, our surfboard manufacturers or whatever, and just buy a piece of fiberglass, and I've never actually thought about it in fact that a lot of people probably have never seen some of these substrates because they're not simply that available. They're particular to a particular type of application. Further down the list here we get into things like rovings, which are a totally different substrate again, and core mats, and also down to our particular types of foam. That's an important thing to sort of for me to discuss here, especially as I move forward, because you're going to see me using massive, sheets of this stuff, which is a fairly heavy duty foam, and this, you're going to see me using this stuff as well, and talking about perforated types of foam where there's little holes in them, and why I've chosen this particular structure to go forward in my boat build. Okay, so if I go back to the laminating schedule, I'll zoom in on this once again, and we'll go right back in here to back to where the gel coat is, and I'm pointing out right here, 300 CSM. Now, chop strand matting is a very interesting material. It's actually an emulsion bound material. You notice here, it's actually it's almost see-through. What that is multiple lengths of around about 4 or 5 centimeter strands of fiberglass that are in all directions. So it's what we call, I guess it's omnidirectional, or essentially just looks like a dog's breakfast really, because it's just everywhere. But it's held together with a bonding agent that is broken down by the styrene that is in vinyl esters and polyesters, and by breaking that down, it will conform to just about any shape, and it's quite easy to eliminate the air that gets trapped or air entrapment underneath it. So it's a very interesting fabric and can be used for a number of different applications. There is a downside to this stuff. It doesn't offer a lot of strength. What it offers is more a binding agent to your gel coat, or if you've got time in between layers where you're not getting to enact a chemical cure, you can re-sand this quite effectively, and then obviously wipe it with styrene. And I keep talking about wiping with styrene every time you leave something to cure and you have to go back and reactivate the product. By doing that, this offers a lot of little mountains and a lot of little crevices and things for the next layer to then bond to. One thing that's very interesting though is I go into a lot of hardware shops and I see you can buy like a square metre of chopped strand matting. This is a 300 grams per square metre chopped strand matting, and in fact is the tie layer or the first layer in my yacht. In fact, there's 2 layers of this goes down immediately after the gel coat. But I see these folded up in packages for about, I don't know, 10 Australian dollars, I guess, for a square metre of it. I can buy this stuff a lot cheaper than that if I buy by the roll or by the 100 kilos. But one thing I have noticed is when you fold, and I'll do this right here, when you fold chopped strand matting, you essentially break all of the little fibres. So when you go into a hardware shop and you buy something that's folded like this, you're actually buying a weakened product. And to be honest, I think it's a little bit of a misguided purchase if you're buying something that's already damaged. This should be, technically, you should always be rolling chopped strand matting, so you're not in fact damaging the substrate. So the 600 double bias comes in various weights: 200, 400, 600, 800, I imagine 1,000. I don't know why you'd use 1,000, why you wouldn't go over the quadrat, but it is great for conforming to unusual shapes. It has an element of give that can be certainly distended and pulled over round and even hatch cover mouldings and such like. By doing that, you're ending up with a very, very strong basis for areas where otherwise quadraxial would be very, very difficult to deal with. You'll notice also this red line that you see in a lot of these fabrics. What that is to enable you to ensure that you're getting it as straight as possible. So you're not knocking those weaves out of alignment and possibly weakening the structure. One thing I did discover while I was applying my double bias, was that on my own, it was actually a bit of a challenge to get it up in pieces. So I found a bit of a dry application was almost better. I'd put it on essentially without too much resin on the substrate. So I'd stick it up there, I'd flatten it out, and I always use a dry brush to eliminate bubbles and get everything straight, and then I'd wet it out more effectively. That was my technique. A lot of guys, I'd be interested to know if you've all used it before, if anyone's used it before, what you do to keep the stuff straight, because it's not that easy. The other thing you'll notice too is these little stitches here. If you catch your fin roller or your applicating roller or brush on one of those, you'll end up with a spaghetti of strings, and that can be a challenge to deal with too when you're already dealing with time pressure and obviously gel times and the like. So 600 double bias formed the outer layer of my foam core. So once I had my 2 layers of 300, my layer of 1200, my certain overlaps that I needed before I applied the foam core, we then went into another layer of 300, then another layer of 600, and then another layer of 300 over the top. And that essentially was the construction as we have it here on our hull. So yachts and canoes and kayaks and all these things are made up of adding layers and layers and layers of these structures until we get to the right sort of, I guess, strength to weight ratio. At 300 grams a square metre, that's the perfect first layer. My second layer on my boat, or in fact, sorry, my third layer on my catamaran is what we call a quadraxial, which is what this particular piece of material is. And I'll try and zoom in on this as well because it's important to see the actual structure of this thing. You'll notice here that we have one layer running at 45 degrees, the outer layer. So there's 4 layers in this substrate. We've got one layer at 45 degrees. The next layer is at 45 degrees opposite to that one. The next layer is at 0 degrees. And then the final layer is at 90 degrees. So we have 4 layers of fabrics all combining to provide a web of strength. That encased in resin and then attached to a couple of layers of this, all of a sudden we're starting to build body, but we're getting very, very strong structure because we have a chemically bonded quadraxial structure then bonded to 2 layers of 300 chop strand matting, which is sort of, I guess, my small impact layer or my bonding layer to my gel coat. Following that layer there, as per the diagram here, we then add another layer of 300. Now, I guess why there's a layer of 300 on the entire catamaran, I actually kept wondering why we keep using these 300 layers. The reason why we do that is because a catamaran is not something that's going to be built in a day. This is taking months to laminate, particularly on my own. If I had a team of 20 guys, we'd knock it over in a few weeks or a couple of weeks. But every time I laminate one place, let's say I laminate a 1200 onto a hull side, I immediately apply another layer of 300 CSM. By doing that, I've encased this layer, or my quad layer, in a 300, but I've then given myself the ability to go back, give it a light sand, give it a light wipe with styrene, once again chemical bond, and then ready to then apply my next layer, which could be foam core, it could be a double bias or a different type of substrate. It could be anything. It could be a bulkhead. So by applying this, I've then given myself a million little mountains and valleys and ridges to be able to then bond efficiently and effectively another layer. Last but not least is the discussion about cores. Once again, you remember in this diagram up in here, we had a 30mm foam core in my hull base, 20mm on my chamfer panel, 20mm on the side of my hull sides, and then 30mm up on my bridge deck. For me to say 20mm, 30mm of foam core, I'm not talking about polystyrene type foam. In fact, anything thick and lightweight could be used as a core, such as cork, for instance, plywood, certainly marine grade plywood only. Please, marine grade plywood only. And obviously there's ways that you need to wet plywood out to make sure that it is never ever susceptible to water ingress or water absorption. Similarly with balsa end grain, it's very, very popular these days in yachts and boats, in fact. And if you do end up with any sort of moisture absorption, it can be like soggy wheat bix once that extends through into areas that, a small, soft, wet patch that big could be 10 feet long for all you know. So you don't know until you get in there. And I've seen local boat builders around here, and watched them repair boats, and that can sometimes end up in the tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars of repair to replace wet or soggy core. So in their wisdom, Oceanic Yachts and the current trend these days is to use a lightweight foam core. There's a number of manufacturers out there. We certainly don't, I'm not going to promote any one. However, we've chosen to use foam from Quadrat, which is a large foam manufacturer. And you'll notice, remember here on this these diagrams, that foam outline there consisted of a number of panels bonded to the glass substrate I'd already laid down, and in a particular shape that offered good strength and good thickness where needed, but certainly not where it wasn't needed. So this particular core was vital to the structure of my cat. Core matting is something very interesting. When we talk about core matting, a lot of us have built a canoe in our past, maybe a school project or a college project. Core mat, this is very, very common. This is quite a thin product. It gets up to around about 5mm in thickness, I think. It's a Q-cell laden fabric that wets out quite effectively and provides good thickness, and would be very, very appropriate in the likes of a canoe or a kayak, maybe in a bathtub perhaps, and certainly in some of my internal modules and smaller components where I just want a little bit of thickness without a lot of weight. So it's cheap. It's you buy it by the meter. You can buy it in a big roll, and it's quite easy to apply and wets out like that. So very, very easy to use. I certainly won't be using it on any of the structural components of my boat because it offers no structure. When you move into plywoods and foam and balsa, you end up with structural strength. Now, the foam that Oceanic Yacht Survey and Design applied to our boat is a Quadrat H80 foam. It's a H80 stands for 80 kilograms per square meter. So if I had a cube, 1 meter in volume, or 1 meter cubed, it would weigh 80 kilos. Now that, you can see how light that is. Effectively, it's paperweight, but one property you will notice is that it is virtually unbendable. It is incredibly strong. It's as good as a piece of wood, but around about, probably about, I don't know, 5-6% of the weight. So we're talking about a very, very strong substrate that can be used, certainly with this one, on flat areas. I have had a bit of success with thermoforming it to shape it to my hull sides. Wasn't overly successful, but I have seen guys thermoform this stuff into amazing shapes. You've just got to have the patience to get that thermoforming happening. Obviously, you heat it to a point where you don't want to change the structure of the foam, and then apply it very quickly, hold it in place with a number of clamps, and move on. Yeah, you'll probably see some videos of the clamping that I use to put some of this on some of the more concave areas of my hull side. So with this particular material, H80, it's a PVC, so it's polyvinyl chloride, so it's a pretty serious chemical here. And a couple of things to note when you're cutting this, when you're grinding it, is that you should always wear a respirator. This stuff, I'm not really sure, polyvinyl chloride is not the best thing to breathe. It certainly is not the best thing to get in your eye or to obviously ingest. You don't want to be doing any of that. So I wear a full face respirator most of the time when I'm cutting this, and good eyewear. So yeah, plug from me. Good safety gear, very, very important. The other attributes of this stuff, which is so important, is firstly, it can be worked in temperatures up to 140 degrees Celsius. Now that's a fairly significant temperature, and pretty much covers you in the range when you're applying resins that are catalyzed at 1 or 2%. The exothermic reaction, or in fact the heat reaction that you get when you catalyze any resin, is quite hot. I mean, to the point that you almost can't touch it some days, depending on the humidity and obviously temperature. This stuff will handle 140 degrees. Now 140 degrees is way above boiling point, so it's great for that. So you don't have to worry about whether it's going to melt under the load of exothermic reaction. Secondly, it virtually has no water absorption. That is critical to any boat where you may have a chip in the gel coat, or you might have scratched your boat on a mooring, or when you're anchoring up or something, and those sorts of things happen. And how many times I see these beautiful yachts out there with a little ding this big, and I think, oh, I wonder what's behind that. I've seen core damage that looks like that big when it's 10 feet long. A great feature of this stuff is it has an incredible tolerance to chemicals. So it'll tolerate diesel spills. It'll tolerate the styrene attack that happens when you're applying polyesters and vinyl esters, and in fact the amines in epoxies. So it's pretty much the bee's knees, and this is the business, and it's shitly expensive, like extremely expensive. In Australia currently it's around about $200 for a 2.2 metre by 1.2 metre sheet. So I'm up in the order of a lot of money for my hull. I've taken delivery of about 12 boxes of this stuff, and we're talking, it's a substantial investment in putting foam in. The payoff is that I've made a boat that hopefully is going to be, or making a boat it's going to be around about a ton lighter than it would be if I'd put in 12 layers of quadraxial. That's the real payoff. So you've got increased performance under sail, increased efficiency under motor. So if you're motoring, you're obviously going to be able to save a significant amount of fuel by pushing a lighter boat. Really, really important stuff to note. So that's 20 mil. My hull sides, my chamfer panel is made of this underneath, with 4 layers of glass underneath and another 3 on top, and that's the boat. Once again, my actual hull, or the bridge deck, is 30 mil, so it's a pretty substantially thicker, obviously 10 mil thicker. But the advantage of that is that my bridge deck is around about this thick, and ultralight. So once again, there is an issue with this stuff, as it doesn't bend very easily. It can be kerfed, and by kerfing I mean you cut slots in it, millions of slots, or you route slots, and then you bend it over a mold, or bend it over the shape. that's okay, but you're also cutting out areas of structure. So generally better if you use a grid scored version of this, which I've got a piece of it here. But one thing about this is called perforated. You'll notice I've noted perforated here. Every 40 millimeters there is a hole drilled, and that hole allows the resin to impregnate up inside it like millions of little needles, holding the substrate down until you get your next layer on. In fact, in an infusion sense, you'd be infusing the resin straight through those holes. So perforated is a great substrate to be using. Now, having said that, a lot of my boat has a lot of intricate curves, and we use a product called Grid Score. Now, this is a very important product, and I don't think I could actually foam core my boat without this. It is held together. You'll notice here that it's actually thousands of little 25 millimeter square blocks held together with a fiberglass scrim. Now, by a scrim, it's around about probably 150 gram normal weave fiberglass cloth holding that together. So I see a lot of guys put this on and then they sand it off. I personally don't see why you'd sand off a layer unless you wanted to save weight. The problem with sanding that off, you're then getting into the fabric. Unless you want a perfect finish that can't be attained by fairing or whatever, I've left the scrim on. It basically absorbs the resin just like any other chop matting or glass will, and forms just that extra little layer while holding the stinker together. The only problem with this stuff is that when you apply this substrate, so let's put it all back together again. When you apply these substrates on the edges, you're required to cut I guess about a 30-degree angle in fact I think I went about 45 or 2-to-1 ratio on the edges, so that when you lay the glass down, you don't end up with a big line of air bubbles along here. So that's okay when you've got a flat sheet and you can just simply miter it with a power saw. So I got all excited and tried to cut this at 45 degrees, and what happened is a complete chunk would just fly out. So I'd lose a whole square. So what I had to do with this is, and you'll see this in future videos, I had to physically bond this onto the hull and then take a multi-tool or an oscillating multi-tool and cut my 45 degrees, or my 30 degrees along that line, and then go back with a flat disc sander and a roller sander to get a perfect edge, so that I, rather than risk losing a big chunk out of this, and where the chunks fell out, you simply get another couple of chunks, glue it in place and sand it back after it's cured. So fabulous product, able to conform to a lot of shapes, and you're going to see me using a lot of this. About probably 60-70% more expensive than flat sheet or standard perforated core. So I hope this has cleared up a few things. I'm not going to go into woven rovings and the like, because they're simply not used in my construction. But these items here certainly used in bulk quantities. We're talking rolls and rolls and rolls, hundreds and hundreds of kilos of them. And at the end, after I do my last layer, I'm going to use this stuff. Now, I've talked about this when I've made my modules. This stuff is peel ply. Peel ply being a beautiful silky sort of polyester style fabric. And the great thing about this is once I apply my last layer, I intend to do virtually most of the hull with this, paint this on as the resin's still wet, so that wherever I decide to bond again later on, I won't have to sand, I won't have to reactivate with styrene. This basically just tears off and gives me a very, very uniform finish. And that finish is one that doesn't have sharp shards of fiberglass and all those sorts of things that you end up with typically when you're fiberglassing. So it's around about $600 to $700 a roll. So it's around about, oh God, it's probably $6 or $7 Australian dollars a meter. Very expensive, but the way I see it, that investment for me will be saved in long term by not having to spend hours and hours and hours sanding and re-preparing with styrene, and less chemical exposure for me. There's all these things all these reasons why we use all these items in a holistic sense, I guess, to try and save you money in the long run. Obviously, core cuts weight out, quad gives us strength without too much weight, and then you know, obviously we want to use stuff sensibly so that that we can ultimately produce a boat that is you know, built more quickly, essentially more efficient on the water, and use less fuel and better under sail. So after 30 minutes of listening to me ramble on about different techniques and substrates, I think everyone's pretty much got the picture. The job is going to probably linger on for about another month or so just on the hull alone. I'm just trying to do a very, very meticulous job with laminating that hull, and there's going to be plenty of videos of the foam core and then subsequent layers, but I did find that by slowing the whole process down, I was able to get a really good quality in my job. The faster I went, the more errors I made, and ended up with some little sort of voids and things that needed to be subsequently repaired. But it's nice to sort of know that you guys are all on the same page out there. So if you like this video, please click like. I love to hear the feedback. I've had some pretty funny comments made over the last couple of days. Similarly, if you can subscribe to it and share it out to your friends, that'd be great. You know, it's good to share this info and you know, and understand that people are actually enjoying it. If you're not enjoying it, if you're done watching it, then you know, simply turn it off. Like, you know, there's nothing I can do about that. If you don't like it, turn it off. And I'll see you next time on Life on the Mould.